Welcome to Twilight Fables, where the familiar tales you thought you knew take on darker, stranger shapes. Tonight's story is not merely about a girl, a king, and a strange little man who spins straw into gold. It is about bargains stitched in blood and the tapestry that hums with the voices of the trapped. This is Rumpelstiltskin. The miller's daughter did not believe her father's boasting at first. She had stood beside him in the market square, the heavy sacks of flour piled neatly at his feet, when he had puffed out his chest and told the king's steward, "My daughter can spin straw into gold." It was the sort of thing he often said, grand, harmless lies to make the customers laugh. Sometimes he claimed their flour was so fine it could make bread float like a feather. Other days he boasted that his daughter could weave clouds into cloth. Usually people humoured him, but this time the steward did not laugh. His eyes narrowed in a way that made her stomach knot. 2 days later, the king's carriage came rumbling down the rutted road to their mill. The king was a lean, long-fingered man with eyes like polished amber. When he smiled, it was all teeth. His cloak smelled faintly of something metallic, like coins freshly bitten to test their worth. He asked no questions. He simply looked the miller's daughter up and down, as though weighing her in some invisible scale, and ordered her to be brought to the castle. No time for protest. No time for explanation. Her father, pale but proud, urged her into the carriage. "Show them," he whispered. "Show them what you can do." She tried to tell him she could do nothing of the sort, but her voice stuck in her throat. The carriage door closed with a sound like a lock turning. The room they brought her to was small, but suffocating. Straw was piled knee-deep across the floor, golden in the light of the single torch bracketed on the wall. In the centre stood an old spinning wheel, its woods dark with age and something else, something almost like dried blood in the cracks. The king's voice was smooth as silk. "By dawn, you will have spun this straw into gold. If you fail..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The cold curl of his smile said enough. Then the door closed. She heard the heavy scrape of a bolt sliding into place. For a while, she simply sat in the straw, hands limp in her lap. The spinning wheel loomed in front of her, its shadow stretching across the room like a crooked limb. The torch sputtered. She could hear her heart beat in her ears. Then faintly, another sound, a soft snick-snack, like scissors working through cloth. It came from the far corner of the room, where the shadows pooled thickest. She squinted, and something moved. It was a man, or at least, it wore the shape of a man. He was no taller than her shoulder, his back slightly hunched, his skin pale as linen stretched too thin. His eyes gleamed like black glass beads, and his clothes, they shimmered strangely, threads of gold and silver running through the weave, but the weave itself seemed Wrong. The strands writhed faintly, as though alive. He smiled, and it was not a pleasant smile. You can't do it, can you? She shook her head. I can, he said, and I will, if you give me something in return. Her mind scrambled for something she could offer. I have this. She held out the simple silver ring her mother had given her before she died. The man's thin fingers brushed hers as he took it. His skin was warm, too warm. Good, he said. Then he crouched by the wheel. The way he spun was unlike anything she had ever seen. He did not feed the straw into the spindle like a normal spinner. Instead, he took a length of straw and pressed it between his palms. The fibres writhed, twisting into gleaming filaments of gold. He threaded these into the wheel, and as it turned, the room filled with a low, almost musical hum. The hum sank into her bones. She felt a prickle at the base of her skull, as if invisible hands were running threads through her hair. At one point, she swore she saw one of the golden threads twitch, as if trying to crawl off the spindle. When the first pile of gold gleamed at her feet, she reached toward it. The thread was warm, not with the heat of friction, but with something alive. She pulled her hand back quickly. The little man worked all night. By dawn, the room was filled with spools of gold thread, stacked high and glinting in the torchlight. The king returned. His eyes widened, and for the first time, the miller's daughter saw something like hunger there. He did not ask how she had done it. He simply ordered her to be taken to another room, larger, with even more straw. You will do it again, he said, and again, until I say otherwise. That night, she waited. She knew the little man would come, and he did, stepping out from the shadows, as if the darkness itself had shaped him. Another bargain, he said. She had little left to give. Finally, she offered the necklace she'd worn since childhood. He took it without comment, though his fingers lingered on her throat for a moment too long. Then he spun again, the hum filling the air, the gold piling high. But that night, as she watched him work, she noticed something. Each time he pressed the straw, his fingertips glowed faintly, and in the golden threads, she thought she saw shapes, tiny, twisted faces, mouths open, as if screaming. The third night, the king's command came with an edge. The room was massive now, the straw piled so high it nearly brushed the rafters. Do this for me, he said, and I will make you my queen. It was not a proposal, it was a declaration. She had nothing left to offer, no jewellery, no heirlooms. She told the little man so when he appeared. He tilted his head, studying her. Then give me what you do not yet have, he said. Her stomach turned cold. What do you mean? The first child you bear as queen. I will come for it. She could not breathe, but the alternative was death at the king's hand, and she was not ready to die. So she nodded, and the little man's grin widened, threads of gold catching on his teeth. He spun the straw, and the hum this time was deeper, almost like a chant. The golden threads pulsed faintly, and she could feel them tugging at her chest, as though something inside her was being pulled out, strand by strand. When dawn came, the king stood in the doorway, staring at the piles of gold. "My queen," he said simply. And so she became queen, her father boasting to anyone who would listen that his daughter had been blessed with a gift. But at night, in the hush of the royal chambers, she would wake with the faint taste of thread on her tongue, and the feeling that something had been taken from her, stitch by stitch. She told herself she would find a way to break the bargain before the child was born. But in the shadows of her dreams, the little man was always there, fingers weaving, eyes like black glass, whispering in a voice made of humming thread, "I will come for it." The crown was heavier than she expected, not in the way of simple weight, but in the way it pressed into her scalp, as though rooting itself there. She felt its presence always, a constant reminder that she belonged to the king now, and that the little man's bargain clung to her more tightly than the gold filigree ever could. Life in the castle was a performance. At the high table she smiled and poured wine for courtiers who whispered behind their goblets. In the gardens she accepted compliments on her beauty, her grace, her mysterious talent. But in the quiet moments she felt it, an invisible pull at the base of her skull, as though fine threads ran from her crown into some faraway loom. She would dream of it at night, a vast, dark room, lit only by the glimmer of golden spindles. Each thread hummed with a different pitch, and woven among them were faces she almost recognized, her mother, a childhood friend, even the midwife who had once tended her fevers, all of them caught in a weave that trembled when the little man passed his fingers over it. She would wake gasping, fingers knotted in her bedsheets, the phantom hum still thrumming in her bones. The king was not cruel in the way she had feared, but neither was he kind. He treated her more as an ornament than a partner, a valuable possession to display. He spoke often of the kingdom's wealth, of new vaults being built to store the gold she had made. She never corrected him. She couldn't. Who would believe her if she said the gold came from something unnatural, something that fed on more than straw? Months passed. The seasons shifted. The court began to whisper of an heir, and soon those whispers became expectations. When the queen felt the first stirrings of life inside her, she tried to feel joy. She tried to believe that perhaps the little man had been nothing more than a strange nightmare, a spectre conjured by fear and desperation. But the night after she confirmed her pregnancy to the king, the humming returned. It started faintly, a low vibration in her teeth, her bones. Then the shadows in the far corner of her chamber deepened, and he stepped out, as if he had been waiting just beyond the reach of the candlelight. "Ah," he said, voice like silk drawn over a blade. "There it is." She clutched the bedclothes. "It isn't born yet. Threads can be claimed before they are spun," he murmured. moving closer. His clothes shifted as he walked, the golden threads in them twitching faintly, as if trying to escape. You feel it too, don't you? The pull, the bond. She forced herself to meet his gaze. I will not give it to you. His smile was slow, indulgent, like a cat watching a trapped mouse. Insist it will escape. A bargain is a bargain. Bargains can be broken. He tilted his head. Yes, but not without a price. For the next weeks, she scoured the castle's libraries. She pored over brittle scrolls and dusty tomes, searching for any mention of bargains with creatures like him. Most spoke in riddles, warning of the spinners of life and the weavers of fate, but none offered a clear path to freedom. One book, older than the rest, told of a tapestry hidden deep in the earth, woven by a being called the Threadkeeper. It was said that every soul who made a bargain was tied into its weave, and that to break a bond, one would have to unpick the exact thread without disturbing the others. The problem was, the book gave no map, no location, only the cryptic note. It lies where gold runs to dust, and dust runs to gold. Her pregnancy advanced, and so did the little man's visits. He came more often now, sometimes without speaking, simply standing in the corner and watching her. His presence seemed to warp the air. Candles guttered when he was near, and the golden embroidery on her gowns would twitch faintly, as if in recognition. Once she woke to find a single golden thread looped around her finger, tied in a perfect knot. It was warm to the touch. When she pulled at it, she swore she felt something deep inside her shift in response, something not entirely her own. She left it there. By the time her belly rounded, the king had ordered new vaults built beneath the castle. He spoke often of the next harvest of gold, though he never told her what he meant. She suspected he had been gathering more straw, perhaps planning to lock her in that spinning room again. She dreamed often of the little man sitting at a wheel in a place that was not the castle. His fingers moved with inhuman precision, and the threads he spun glowed not just gold, but silver, red, and deep black. Those coloured threads were rarer, and he handled them with a kind of reverence. She had the sickening feeling that those colours meant something about the people from whom they'd been taken. One night, near the end of her 7th month, she could not sleep. The hum was louder than ever, vibrating through her ribs. She rose from bed, wrapping herself in a robe, and followed it, down through the halls, past the sleeping guards, down into the vaults. At the lowest level, she found something she had never seen before. Not piles of coins, but spools, hundreds of them, stacked in neat rows, each glowing faintly in the dark. Some were pure gold, but others shimmered in strange hues. When she reached for one, a voice hissed in her ear. Careful! She spun around. The little man was there, closer than she'd realised, his black glass eyes catching the lamplight. "What are these?" she whispered. "Lives," he said simply. "Spun fine, woven later," her breath caught. "You mean?" "I mean," he said, stepping past her to run his fingers over the nearest spool, "that every bargain has its yield. Gold is only the byproduct. This," he tapped the glowing thread, "is the true prize." Her hand went instinctively to her stomach. He noticed, of course. His smile widened. After that night, she avoided the vaults, but she could not avoid the dreams. In them, the tapestry grew larger, each new thread humming with a distinct voice. Some whispered in languages she did not know. Some screamed. One night, she thought she heard her own voice among them, faint but growing louder. It became harder to hide her distress from the court. The king noticed her pallor, the way her hand shook when she lifted a goblet. He attributed it to the pregnancy and ordered more rest. But rest only meant more dreams, more time alone with the hum. As the 9th month drew near, she decided she could not wait until the child was born. She had to find the threadkeeper's tapestry and unpick the thread herself. She began gathering supplies, candles, food, a dagger small enough to hide beneath her gown. But the night before she planned to slip away, the little man came again. This time, he did not linger in the corner. He sat at the foot of her bed, hands folded neatly in his lap. "It will be soon," he said softly. She gritted her teeth. "I will stop you." His expression did not change, but his eyes gleamed. "If you try, you will see what happens to those who tug at the wrong thread." She could not speak. The hum filled her skull until it drowned out her own heartbeat, and in the dark she thought she heard her unborn child's voice, soft, distant, but tangled in the weave. The first pains came with the dawn. They were not the gentle tugs the midwives in the village had once described to her. They were sharp, like someone plucking a string deep inside her body, plucking it hard enough to make her bones sing. She doubled over at the foot of the bed, clutching the carved post until her knuckles whitened. The royal physician was summoned, along with a team of midwives, draped in crisp linen. They fluttered around her like pale moths, their voices soft but urgent. The king arrived too, smiling like a man expecting a fine wine to be uncorked. He kissed her forehead, but his lips were cool, his eyes calculating. "You will be well," he said, as if that were an order. Hours passed. The contractions came faster, sharper, each one pulling something invisible through her, as though her child was being drawn, not only into the world, but into a waiting set of fingers elsewhere. She bit her tongue to keep from crying out, not from pain, but from fear of what might hear her. And something did hear her. The shadows in the far corner of the birthing room shifted, though no one else seemed to notice. She knew the shape before it fully emerged. The little man, his eyes glinting black his smile too still. He stepped forward, and this time she noticed something she had never seen before. Tiny golden threads trailing from his fingers, stretching across the floor toward her. They glimmered faintly in the torchlight, like the fine silk of a spider web. Her breath caught. No. The midwife at her side thought she was speaking of the pain. It is natural, Your Majesty. Breathe. But the little man only tilted his head, his gaze on her belly. Almost time. Panic spurred her to speak. Leave, she whispered. Not now. Not here. He crouched beside the bed, so close that she could smell the faint, metallic king of him, like warm copper coins. A bargain does not wait for convenience. The pain surged again, and for a moment her vision blurred. In that haze, she thought she saw the golden threads tightening around her stomach, cinching like a noose. She woke to the sound of crying, not hers, but high and thin, the unmistakable wail of a newborn. Relief flooded her, followed by a deeper dread. The little man was standing over the cradle the midwives had set at her bedside. His fingers hovered just above the child's cheek. Her arms moved before she could think. She grabbed the dagger she had hidden beneath the bed earlier and lunged. The blade sliced cleanly through one of the golden threads, trailing from his hand. The sound he made was unlike anything human, a sharp, tearing hiss, as if fabric had been ripped in two. His eyes narrowed, and for the first time she saw something like pain flicker there. You will regret that, he whispered. Then he was gone, leaving only the faint hum in the air. Now trembling with anger, the midwives fussed over her, oblivious to the fact that an unseen war had just begun in their presence. She held her child close, feeling the small heartbeat against her own. She knew the thread was not truly severed, not yet, but she had bought herself time. Over the next days, she refused to let the child out of her sight. The king, though irritated by her protectiveness, allowed it. His interest was more in the celebrations and the gifts that poured into the court than in the child itself. But she felt the little man's absence like a shadow just beyond the door. Sometimes she would find a single golden hair in the cradle, though her child's hair was still the dark brown of newborns. Sometimes, in the hush of the night, she would hear a faint snick-snack, like a wheel turning. The cryptic line from the ancient book haunted her. It lies where gold runs to dust, and dust runs to gold. She thought about the mines in the northern hills, where the kingdom's veins of ore had long ago dried up, leaving only crumbling shafts. She thought about the stories of sudden floods in those tunnels, how water sometimes pooled there, like dark mirrors, gold to dust, dust to gold, cycles of gain and loss. And she thought about leaving the castle. It was not simple. Guards patrolled every corridor, and the king had begun keeping a closer watch on her, perhaps sensing her restlessness. But a month after the birth, an opportunity came. The king announced a tour of the outlying villages, and though he insisted she accompany him for appearances, she saw her chance in the journey. They travelled in a procession of carriages, the roads winding through forest and valleys. At night they lodged in manors and fortified inns. On the third night, as the court drank themselves into a stupor in the hall below, she wrapped her child in a dark shawl and slipped from her chamber. The air outside was sharp with winter. She kept to the shadows, moving quickly toward the stables. A single horse stood saddled, as if waiting. She wondered for a brief, dangerous moment if the little man had left it for her, or if he was leading her somewhere he wanted her to go. Still, she mounted. The ride to the northern hills was long and cold. The moon was a thin silver hook in the sky, the road a pale ribbon winding through the dark. When she reached the old mining village, it was silent. Windows were boarded, doors hung crooked, and the wind moved through the empty streets like a whisper. The mine's entrance yawned black against the snow. She hesitated only a moment before stepping inside. The air was damp, the walls lined with rotting beams. Her footsteps echoed strangely, as if the tunnels themselves were listening. The child stirred against her chest, and she murmured to soothe them. Deeper in, she found it, a vast chamber where the walls glittered faintly with flakes of old gold, but the floor was layered with a thick, silty dust. A narrow stream ran through it, the water catching the gold flecks and carrying them away. Gold runs to dust, dust runs to gold. In the centre of the chamber stood a loom. It was enormous, larger than any she had ever seen, with a frame of blackened wood and spindles of tarnished silver, and on it was the tapestry from her dreams. She stepped closer, her breath catching. Each thread shimmered faintly, and she could see faces in them, some serene, some screaming, some simply watching. Her gaze swept frantically over the weave until she found it, a thread that was warm brown at the base, but at its tip it shifted toward gold. It thrummed when she touched it, and she felt her child stir in her arms. She reached for a loose end, but before she could pull, a voice spoke from the darkness behind her. "Careful," the little man said. She spun to see him leaning against a beam, his head tilted, his expression unreadable. "One wrong tug," he continued, "and the whole weave unravels, every thread, every life gone." She swallowed hard. "I want my child free, and I want what is mine." He stepped forward, his clothes rustling faintly. "Perhaps we can make another bargain." Her grip tightened on the dagger at her belt. "No more bargains." His smile thinned. "Then you will have to cut." The hum in the chamber rose, vibrating the air. The faces in the tapestry seemed to shift, their mouths opening wider. Some began to speak, not words, but pleading sounds. Her hand shook as she reached again for the brown and gold thread. The little man stood perfectly still, his eyes locked on hers, and then, just as her fingers closed on it, the child in her arms began to cry. The sound was not a normal cry. It was sharp, high, and perfectly in tune with the hum of the tapestry. The threads around her quivered in response. The little man's smile returned. Ah, it's begun. The thing in the shadows didn't move to comfort her. He stood, as he always did, too still, too thin, his head cocked at a listening angle, his long fingers tapping against his thigh, like a man keeping time to some tune only he could hear. "You will wake him," Rumpelstiltskin whispered, and the very breath that carried his words seemed to curl through the air like smoke. Gerda clutched the bundle in her arms tighter. Her son, barely more than a year old, wrapped in a blanket, so worn it was almost threadbare. His tiny fists twitched in his sleep, a soft whimper escaping his lips. Her tears stopped immediately, not because she had willed them to, but because fear was an excellent silencer. "That's better," Rumpelstiltskin said, stepping forward into the lamplight. The shadows peeled off him reluctantly, as if they did not want to let him go. His eyes were green tonight, the bright green of new leaves in spring, but they held no warmth, only an alertness that made her think of a hawk circling high above. She swallowed hard. "You said I had time, and you've used it poorly," he replied. "The guessing has gone on long enough." She had been given 3 nights to guess his name. Tonight was the 3rd. 2 nights had already passed in frantic desperation. Nights spent whispering strange, wild names she had read in the oldest books of the palace library. Names she had heard in the marketplace. Names she had dreamt in fever. None of them were right, and with each wrong guess, he had smiled. "Perhaps we should begin," he said now, brushing an invisible speck from his coat sleeve. Gerda shook her head violently. "I still have more names. You had more names last night, and the night before. They were all wrong." "Then give me a clue," she begged. "Something, anything, please." He tilted his head, studying her as one might study a puzzle box with an intriguing mechanism. "Do you know why names have power?" She hesitated. This was not the bargain, but she sensed he wanted her to answer. "They bind things," she said cautiously. "They make something yours, or you theirs." His thin smile widened. "Close. They tell the truth about what something is. A name is a confession." She did not understand, but the way he said it made her feel cold. "One last round," he said, taking a single, deliberate step toward her. The lantern's glow warped over his face, bending his sharp cheekbones into strange angles. "Guess." Her mouth was dry. She whispered the first name that came to mind, one she had plucked from a collection of old folk songs. "Thornwick." He chuckled, the sound like dry reeds breaking in the wind. "No." "Emberlane." "No." "Hargrin." "No." The names began spilling out faster, each one more frantic than the last. Ashfell, grey tongue, cold harrow, windle, brimage. Stop! It was not a shout. He didn't need to shout. The command in his voice wrapped around her throat like a leash. You will not speak the right name, he said softly, because you do not know it. Her breath came fast. Then tell me what you are. He grinned. Ah, but if I tell you, you'll make me yours, and we can't have that. He crouched so that his face was level with hers. The way he moved made her think of a spider, drawing close to inspect its prey, not hurrying, because there was no need. You made a deal with me, little queen, he murmured. Your firstborn for gold spun from straw. You think I tricked you, but you came to me. Remember, you called me into that chamber. You whispered into the dark, and I answered. Her throat tightened. I didn't know what you were. You didn't ask. They stayed there, eye to eye, until the baby stirred and whimpered again. Rumpelstiltskin's gaze flicked downward, and the grin that spread across his face was unlike the others. It was sharper, hungrier. Gerda pulled her son closer, rocking him, whispering his name over and over like a prayer. Tomorrow at dawn, Rumpelstiltskin said, standing in one smooth motion. If you do not speak my name by then, he is mine. And then he was gone, not walking away, not fading, but simply not being there anymore, as though she had blinked him out of existence. The rest of the night was not quiet. Gerda paced the room until her legs ached. She sent her maid running to every corner of the palace, every inn, every alley, bribing and begging for strange names. She ordered the guards to wake the old crones who lived on the outskirts, the ones who spoke to themselves and to the wind. She demanded lists, hundreds of them, ashes upon pages of impossible syllables. But somewhere in her chest, she knew it wouldn't be enough. At the blackest hour before dawn, the captain of the guard returned with a tale. Your Majesty, he said, his voice low, there's a woodcutter who swears he saw something in the forest, dancing around a fire, a man, small as a child, with hair like rust and eyes like a cat's. He says he heard him singing. Gerda's hands trembled. What was the song? It was strange, the captain said, scratching his beard, but he remembers it clear. Something like, tonight, tonight, my plans begin. The queen will never win the game. No one knows the trick within. That Rumpelstiltskin is my name. The room tilted. Gerda gripped the table to steady herself. Say it again, she whispered. The captain repeated it. Her heart beat so loudly, she thought the whole castle must hear it. She had the name. She had the name. Dawn came with a pale, sickly light, spilling over the palace courtyard. Gerda stood there waiting, her son in her arms, the guards at her back. When Rumpelstiltskin appeared, he did not step from shadow or fog. He simply arrived, as though he had always been there. Well? He asked, eyes glinting. Gerda took a deep breath. Your name is Rumpelstiltskin, For the first time since she had met him, his smile faltered. "Who told you?" he hissed. "You did," she said, her voice steady now. "You always do, don't you? You can't help but brag." His eyes narrowed. His skin seemed to ripple. The green of his irises bleeding into the whites until they were nothing but pools of poison colour. "You think you've won," he said slowly. "I know I have." And then he laughed. It was not the dry, reed-breaking laugh she had heard before. This was fuller, deeper, a sound that rolled through the courtyard like a gathering storm. "You know my name," he said. "Yes, clever girl, but names have power, and you've spoken mine aloud. Do you know what that means?" The wind shifted, and every torch in the courtyard guttered. Gerda's grip on her son tightened. "It means you can't take him. It means," Rumpelstiltskin said, stepping closer, "that you have bound me, and if I am bound, then so are you." The ground beneath her feet shuddered. Somewhere deep below, she heard the unmistakable sound of something cracking open. "You called me once to make gold from straw," he whispered. "Now you've called me again, without meaning to. The third time, my dear, will be the last thing you ever do." And with that, he vanished. Only this time, the shadows didn't let go. They lingered around Gerda's ankles, curling like smoke, even as the sun rose. The fire in the hearth crackled weakly, the flames giving off more smoke than heat. The queen sat in her high-backed chair, her hands folded tightly in her lap, knuckles pale. Outside the castle, winter had gripped the land in a way that seemed unnatural. The snow was too heavy, the wind too constant, and the cold felt as though it came from somewhere deeper than the clouds. She suspected it was him. It had been 3 nights since Rumpelstiltskin's last visit, and the silence in between was somehow worse than his taunts. His voice, thin, sharp, and oddly playful, still lingered in her mind like a splinter lodged under the skin. She was no longer certain which frightened her more, the idea that she might fail to learn his name, or the thought of what might happen if she did, because in her heart she felt that knowing his name would not make him disappear. It might only let her see what he truly was. The king had noticed her unease, but only in passing. He seemed preoccupied, his brow furrowed, his words clipped. Servants whispered that his temper had grown short, that he had begun wandering the halls at night. Tonight, she would not wait passively for the creature to appear. She stood, the rustle of her gown loud in the silent chamber, and crossed to the far wall where a hidden latch opened into a narrow passageway. Few knew of these corridors, the bones of the castle where draughts carried voices farther than they should, and torchlight seemed to vanish into the stone. She had overheard one of the washerwomen mention, in a tone that was too hushed not to be significant, a place beyond the eastern woods, a clearing where no snow settled, where the ground stayed bare and black no matter the season. Some said it was cursed ground, a place where witches danced. Others claimed it was where lost children's laughter could still be heard at night, long after they'd been swallowed by the forest. If the creature had a home, she thought, it would be somewhere like that. She lit a single lamp, shielding it with her palm as she navigated the cramped stairwell downward. Her footsteps echoed in an oddly doubled way, as if something else, not quite human, was keeping pace a few steps behind. She did not turn around. The night outside was sharp and full of stars. The moonlight painted the snow in shades of blue and white, but the trees ahead swallowed that glow whole. She crossed the frozen moat by the narrow footbridge, the wood groaning beneath her weight. The forest was worse than she expected. The snow clung to the branches in heavy clumps, bending them into skeletal shapes. The path narrowed until she was pushing through brambles that snagged at her sleeves. She could not hear the wind anymore, only the faint, rhythmic sound of crunching snow, which she realized with a slow tightening in her chest, matched her own footsteps exactly. When she stopped, it stopped. She forced herself forward until she saw it. The clearing. It was exactly as described. A perfect circle of bare earth in the midst of the snowbound forest. The soil was dark, almost black, and it steamed faintly as if it were breathing. No frost touched it. No footprints marked its surface. In the centre stood a crooked wooden post, and from it hung something she could not identify. At first, a bundle of cloth, tied tight. She approached slowly, her lamp trembling in her grasp. It was a child's dress, small, pale, and stained at the hem. Inside the folds, she saw a lock of golden hair tied with red thread. Her heart lurched. From the shadow beyond the post came a sound, a low, guttural laugh, wet and rasping. "Curious little queen," the voice said. She turned, and he was there. He looked different here, in his own place. The hunched figure she had seen in her chamber was gone. Now he stood taller, his limbs too long, his fingers ending in nails like polished black glass. His eyes were pale and glimmering, his mouth too wide. "I wondered," he said, tilting his head, "how long before you came to me, instead of waiting for me to come to you." She swallowed, the cold air burning her lungs. "I want your name." "Of course you do," he said softly, stepping into the circle so that the earth seemed to shift under his bare feet. "Everyone who bargains with me does. But it is not the name that matters, little queen. It is the knowing." "What does that mean?" He smiled. His teeth were too sharp. "It means that when you speak my name, you are not binding me. You are binding yourself. You will know me. And once you know me, you cannot unknow me." Her skin prickled, but she forced her voice to stay steady. "I will find it, no matter what it costs." His laugh was almost gentle this time. "Oh, it will cost more than you think." With a sudden movement, he reached out and brushed his fingers along her jaw. The touch burned, though his skin was cold as ice. Her vision swam for a moment, and she saw something behind his pale eyes. Shapes moving in darkness, writhing things that were neither man nor beast. She staggered back, her boot breaking the edge of the circle. The snow there seemed to hiss, as if it disliked her intrusion. "I will give you a gift," he said, as though nothing had happened. "A hint. My name was once spoken in the cradle by a dying mother. She thought it a blessing. She was wrong, and with that, he stepped backward into the shadow, his shape thinning, stretching, and vanishing between one heartbeat and the next. The Queen stood there for a long time, the wind slowly returning to the forest. She felt the weight of the child's dress in her hands and realized she had picked it up without meaning to. When she returned to the castle, dawn was breaking, pale and sickly over the snow. She hid the dress in a locked chest at the foot of her bed. That morning, when the king came to her chambers, he looked at her in a way that made her uneasy, his eyes lingering too long, his voice overly sweet. "I hear you have been wandering the woods," he said. She froze. "Who told you that?" "No one," he replied. "I simply know when my queen's feet have touched cursed ground." His smile was not comforting. That night, she dreamed of the creature's eyes and of the name unspoken on her lips. She dreamed of the clearing, the steaming earth, and a shadow that whispered from beneath it. And when she awoke, she thought she could hear scratching beneath the stones of her chamber floor. The scratching stopped when she called for the guards, but the dress in her locked chest was damp, as though freshly pulled from wet soil. The castle seemed different now, not the halls or the stone, which remained as cold and grey as ever, but the way the air felt, heavy, expectant, like a storm trapped inside a glass jar. Gerda could sense it the moment she stepped into the corridors. The threads of the bargain pulsing faintly beneath her skin, tugging at her every move. Her son slept in the cradle she had brought into her chambers weeks earlier. Each breath he drew seemed to echo through her chest, a reminder of what she protected and what she feared losing. She had learned to listen to the threads, a low hum when he was calm, a sharp, fraying edge when the little man drew near. Even if she could not see him, the nightmares were worse now. Each night, she dreamed of him weaving a tapestry larger than the world itself, each thread a life, each stitch a bargain she had made without knowing it. And in every dream, the child's voice rose above the others, crying, laughing, singing, always bound in gold and brown threads that hummed with strange, impossible music. The morning brought no relief. The Queen rose, her hands trembling slightly as she dressed, brushing back hair that seemed to bristle with static. The King did not notice her unease, or perhaps he did, but he chose to ignore it. assuming it was the lingering strain of childbirth or her natural nervousness. But Gerda knew better. The little man would come, and she would have to be ready. She began her search again, scouring the palace for anything, any clue, any whisper, any hint of a name. She bribed servants to speak in riddles, begged the cook to tell her all the gossip he heard from the kitchens, and interrogated the laundresses until they wept over their soapy cloths. Each time she left with nothing but names that rattled hollow in her mouth: Grindle, Farskin, Morrow, Tyndall. None fit, none would, and all the while the hum beneath her skin reminded her of what was at stake. That night she found herself walking the halls alone, the child bundled against her chest, the candlelight flickering against the stone walls. She followed instinct rather than sound, instinct that led her to the old servants' wing of the castle, a section long abandoned, where dust lay thick on the floor and cobwebs hung from every beam. It was here that she first heard it, the soft clatter of tiny footsteps echoing from the shadows. Rumpelstiltskin, she whispered aloud before she could stop herself. The word trembled, heavy with fear and uncertainty. The footsteps froze. She dared not breathe. The little man emerged from the shadows, his form stretched and distorted by the low ceiling. His eyes glimmered like wet stones, and his mouth curved into a smile that was both indulgent and predatory. "You speak it," he said softly, his voice a thread in the darkness. "And yet you do not know, you do not understand the meaning of the name." Her hands shook. I do. I want my child free." He tilted his head, letting the candlelight catch the glimmer of golden threads coiled in his sleeves. "And yet every name has power. Speak mine, and you bind yourself. You think it will end here? No, it is only the beginning." Gerda clutched the child closer, feeling the baby stir against her chest. The hum beneath her skin quickened, as though in warning. She knew she had to act, but fear chained her tongue. He stepped closer, each movement precise, silent, yet heavy with intent. "Do you know why I came to you? To spin gold from straw," she said, voice shaking. "To take your bargain." "Ah," he said, his smile widening. "Yes, but more than that, I came to claim the truth hidden in you. Every bargain is a weaving of will, a thread pulled taut, and now, you seek to undo it." She swallowed hard. "I will undo it. I will." The air in the corridor thickened, turning humid and almost tangible, pressing against her skin like water. Shadows curled unnaturally along the walls. In the corner of her eye, she thought she saw threads stretching from her child to the far ceiling, threads that shimmered golden brown, humming faintly. "You are brave," he said, voice almost gentle, "but you do not understand. To cut the thread, is to risk unravelling more than you know. Every bargain has a cost, and sometimes the cost is immeasurable. What do you mean? He crouched so that he was level with her, his eyes catching the candlelight in a way that made them seem molten. There are threads in the tapestry you cannot see, lives entwined, fates connected. You pull at one and others will follow. There is no simple undoing. Her stomach tightened. She realized the scope of what she faced. If she made a mistake, if she misjudged the pattern, her child could be lost, or worse. Days passed, though they might have been hours. Time itself seemed to warp around the little man's presence. Gerda learned to move through the palace almost silently, listening for the hum that warned of his approach. She discovered a small chamber, tucked beneath the servants' quarters, dust-covered and unused. Here she began weaving her own threads, using old silk, scraps of cloth, and strands of her own hair, trying to map the tapestry in miniature. She worked feverishly, drawing, knotting, weaving, and tying threads, murmuring names and possibilities. Each time the little man appeared, she adjusted, redid, and retied her model, and each time he smiled, not cruelly, not angrily, but with a quiet, knowing patience, as though he were teaching her a lesson that would cost her more than she could imagine. It was the fourth night after she had begun this secret work that he appeared again in the chamber. "You think you understand," he said, voice low, "but you do not. You are meddling in patterns older than kings, older than the land. You do not know what will unravel if you cut the wrong thread." "I don't care," she said, her voice trembling. "I will free my child. I will save him from you." He tilted his head. Ah, so fierce, so determined, yet so fragile. She stood her ground, gripping the strands of silk in her hands like lifelines. She felt the threads thrum against her palms, the hum coursing through her fingers. Somewhere in the shadows, she thought she saw shapes moving, faces of those lost, watching her struggle. Then he moved, suddenly, impossibly fast. One hand brushed her temple, and her head swam. She saw visions, the tapestry in its entirety, threads stretching beyond comprehension, threads that shimmered gold, brown, red, black. Each thread represented a life, each life a story, each story a choice, made or unmade. The baby cried out, and the threads vibrated violently. She gasped, pulling herself back, clutching the child. "You see," he whispered, "everything is connected. You cannot undo one without touching another. You cannot save one without risking all." "I have to try," she said, voice hoarse, "even if it costs me everything." He smiled again, almost fondly, and stepped back into the shadows. "Very well, begin, But know this, the weaver watches, and every mistake will be felt. For the rest of the night, Gerda worked. She knelt on the floor, with her miniature tapestry stretched out before her, running her fingers over the threads, marking the patterns, trying to memorize the hum, the flow, the subtle tension. Every so often, she would whisper the names she had heard in the dreams, the names she had guessed, the ones she thought might belong to him. All of them hummed faintly, vibrating with possibility and danger, and somewhere deep beneath the castle, she felt the tapestry react to her efforts. A faint shudder, a trembling, a warning. By the time dawn crept in, her hands were raw, her hair tangled, her vision blurred. She had mapped only a fraction of the threads, but she knew something had changed. The hum was weaker, less constant, as though her understanding, incomplete as it was, had begun to assert its influence. She allowed herself a single thought of hope, fragile, fleeting, but alive. And somewhere, far beyond the walls of the chamber, a shadow moved, watching, calculating, waiting. The candlelight flickered across the chamber, throwing shadows that seemed alive, stretching and twisting into shapes that were almost human. Gerda knelt over the miniature tapestry she had been constructing for nights on end, her fingers raw from pulling and knotting the silk threads. Every breath she drew was measured, every heartbeat synchronized, with the faint hum vibrating through the threads. Her son slept quietly in the cradle beside her, but she did not trust the fragile peace. Every whisper of wind, every shift in the shadows, could herald the arrival of Rumpelstiltskin, the weaver of bargains, the man of thread. Tonight, she resolved, she would confront him directly, not with pleas or guesses, not with bribes or braced courage, but by understanding the web he had spun and severing it with knowledge. The air shifted suddenly, warmer than it should have been, a low rustle passing through the room, as if the walls themselves had inhaled sharply. From the corner, the shadows gathered and solidified. "You are persistent," he said, emerging from darkness, with his long, spindly limbs folded neatly by his sides. His eyes glimmered with the green-gold hue that always unsettled her, reflecting the candlelight like molten metal. "I am your mother," she said firmly, though her voice trembled, "and I will protect my child." He tilted his head, the barest smirk playing across his lips. "Ah, brave words. Brave, yes. But do you understand what you are up against? You face not merely a man, but a pattern older than the oldest kings, older than the land itself. One wrong pull, and everything unravels. Every life, every thread, every choice." "I do not care," she said. "I have to try." He moved closer, so silently that the candle flames did not flicker. "Very well," he whispered. "Then see." In an instant, the chamber changed. The walls fell away. The floor beneath her became transparent. and the air seemed to shimmer with the colour of threads, gold, brown, crimson, black, silver, all vibrating with an almost audible hum. Gerda gasped. Before her eyes, the tapestry she had been attempting to recreate in miniature had expanded to fill the entire space around her. Every thread was alive, writhing, connecting not just to her child, but to hundreds of unseen lives, to events she could barely comprehend, to bargains made in shadows she had never known existed. Rumpelstiltskin stood at the centre, his arms raised, fingers moving gracefully through the threads, as though playing an invisible harp. The threads responded, humming louder, quivering, weaving themselves tighter. "You see now," he said softly, "why knowing a name is only the beginning. To untangle the threads without destroying what is connected, that is the true challenge. Few ever learn it." "I will learn it," she said, though her throat burned with the enormity of what she faced. "I have to." The little man's smile thinned, sharp as a knife. Do you truly know what it means to pull at a thread, to try to free one without undoing the whole? You will be tempted, you will make mistakes, and when you do," his voice lowered to a hiss, "the tapestry will claim more than just your child." She swallowed hard, steeling herself. "I will risk everything. For hours, or perhaps days." Time had little meaning here. She traced threads, studied their vibrations, noted their colour shifts and tension. She whispered every name she had guessed, every fragment she had overheard in dreams, every syllable she had gleaned from old folk songs. Some threads shimmered faintly at the sound of certain words. Others recoiled violently, snapping and unravelling the surrounding filaments. Rumpelstiltskin watched silently, only occasionally moving a finger to redirect a particularly frayed strand. His expression was one of polite curiosity, like a teacher observing a student, struggling to master a task far beyond their years. Her hands grew sore, her vision blurred, yet she continued. She refused to leave, refused to let the child out of her sight, refused to let the weaver win. Then something extraordinary happened. A single thread, faint and brown at its base, but gleaming gold at its tip, hummed in resonance when she whispered the name she had learned from the old woodsman's song, Rumpelstiltskin. The thread vibrated violently, weaving itself through the surrounding ones, and for the first time she saw a break in the tapestry. Not a full unravelling, but a single, clear space, a thread free from his manipulation. Rumpelstiltskin's eyes widened ever so slightly, his usual calm shaken. "Interesting," he murmured. "So you have discovered a weakness." "I have," she said, her voice trembling with relief and fear. "But I do not yet know how to use it." He laughed, low and guttural. "Ah, the mortal courage of a mother. Admirable, but do not think it will be enough." With a flick of his hand, the tapestry surged, threads flying like lightning. The floor beneath her feet became unstable, threads wrapping around her ankles, tugging her toward the centre where the weaver stood. She stumbled, but did not fall, clutching her child tightly. "You cannot simply take a thread and claim victory," he said. "Each action has a reaction, every tug a consequence. You will find that the tapestry does not yield so easily." She closed her eyes, listening to the threads, feeling the vibrations beneath her fingertips. One name, the name she had whispered earlier, continued to resonate, strong and clear, while the others faltered. It was her lifeline. With a determined breath, she whispered it again. "Rumpelstiltskin." The thread reacted, glowing brighter, vibrating so powerfully it lifted the child in her arms slightly, as if he were weightless. The surrounding threads shivered, a chorus of muted hums, and the weaver himself stepped back, startled. "You dare!" he hissed. "Yes," she said, standing taller despite exhaustion. "I dare. I will not let you take him." She reached for the thread, and as her fingers touched it, the tapestry seemed to shudder violently. Threads snapped, others tangled and writhed, and the entire chamber shook with a sound like breaking glass. Rumpelstiltskin screamed, a long, echoing sound, human yet alien, as the threads she held pulled taut. The strands around him began to coil and twist, binding him in a web of his own creation. The weaver thrashed, trying to release himself, but the golden brown thread remained firm in her grasp. His eyes, wide with fury, met hers. "You think this ends here?" he spat, his voice a mixture of rage and fear. "Even if you sever me, I will linger, I will return." She tightened her grip. "You will not harm my child. You are bound now. The bargain is broken." With a final, tremendous pull, the thread snapped, and the weaver was lifted off the floor, suspended in the air, trapped in the lattice of threads he had spun. His form began to shrink, twist, and then unravel, each movement leaving behind a faint shimmer that dissolved into the air like smoke. And then he was gone. The chamber was silent except for her own breathing. She held her child close, feeling his tiny heart beat against her chest. The threads in the room lay slack, harmless, faintly glowing in the early morning light that filtered through the stone windows. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to weep, not from fear, not from pain, but from relief. Her child was safe. She had faced the weaver, faced the tapestry, and prevailed. Yet even as she wept, she knew it was not over. Somewhere the threads remained. Somewhere the echoes of the bargain lingered. The weaver's name had power, yes, but so did hers now, and she understood that she had only begun to learn the depths of the weaving that connected her world. She had won the battle. Perhaps one day she would learn to navigate the full tapestry, to understand the web of bargains and threads that span the kingdom. But for now, she clutched her child and breathed in the quiet, the first true quiet she had known since that fateful day in the spinning room. And on outside, the winter sun rose pale over the snow, touching the castle with fragile warmth, as if to remind her that life, fragile and beautiful, could persist even after darkness. The castle was quiet. For the first time in what felt like years, the corridors were devoid of the low hum that had haunted her, the invisible tension that had woven itself into every stone, every shadow. Gerda moved through the halls carefully, her steps light but deliberate. Each breath she drew was free, yet cautious, as if the world itself still held the memory of the weaver's presence. Her child slept in the cradle, warm and soft, oblivious to the dangers that had stalked him. She brushed a hand through his hair and kissed his small forehead, feeling the rapid pulse of life that reminded her of everything she had fought to preserve. Outside, the sun had risen weak and pale, casting long shadows across the snow-covered courtyard. The winter air was cold, sharp and crisp, but it no longer carried the sense of menace that had clung to it for weeks. The morning brought a mixture of relief and unease. Servants whispered quietly to one another, glancing at her with hesitant curiosity. News of the weaver's disappearance had travelled through the castle faster than she could have imagined. No one had seen him leave. Some claimed he had been taken by the winds themselves. Others suggested he had dissolved into the tapestry, leaving only strands of thread in his wake. Gerda did not speak of the full truth. She did not tell them of the miniature tapestry she had laboured over, nor the way she had confronted him in the shadow chamber. Only she knew what it had taken, what risks she had run, and the tenuous thread upon which her child's life had hung. She spent the day inspecting the castle, ensuring that no residual traces of his influence remained. The servants helped, though they feared to touch the areas where the weaver had lingered. In one small corner of the palace, she found a loose strand of thread, gold and brown, dangling from a ceiling beam. She knelt and carefully plucked it away, wrapping it in a piece of cloth and locking it in a chest deep in the bowels of the castle. Even now, she felt a subtle vibration from it, a reminder that some connections could never be fully severed. As night fell, she carried her child to the tower chamber and placed him gently in his crib. She sat beside him, running her fingers over the blanket, tracing its folds, as if by doing so she could memorize every detail of the present moment. Sleep, when it came, was uneasy. Her dreams were filled with threads she had cut, threads she had saved, threads that shimmered with golden light or twisted in shadow. The weaver's voice echoed faintly in the corners of her mind, no longer threatening, but curious, almost reverent. "You have learned much," it whispered, a ghostly sound that made the hairs on her neck rise. "You understand more than you know. The tapestry is alive, and you have touched it. Remember this, all bargains leave marks, and some marks never fade." She woke with a start, her heart pounding. For a long moment, she feared she had lost herself in the threads once more. But then her child stirred, cooing softly, grounding her in the present. She held him close, feeling his warmth, and for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to breathe freely. The following days were filled with the quiet routines of the palace. Gerda moved among the corridors, attending to the needs of her people, checking on the servants, and ensuring that the king remained unaware of the full danger that had threatened their family. She learned to walk lightly, to sense the faint echoes of disturbance in the air, and to trust her instincts above all else. Yet, even as life returned to a semblance of normalcy, she could not escape the memory of the weaver, nor the knowledge that the threads he had woven would remain waiting in the shadows of the world. One evening, as she watched the sun set over the snow-blanketed courtyard, she noticed a single thread glinting in the dying light, stretching from the chimney to the horizon, thin and almost imperceptible. She felt a chill, recognizing the signature of the weaver. Not a threat this time, but a reminder of his presence, of the bargains that had shaped the fate of her family. She whispered his name softly, almost as a prayer, Rumpelstiltskin, and in the stillness that followed, she felt no fear, only understanding. The child in her arms was safe, and the lessons she had learned of courage, cunning, and the price of bargains would remain with her always. The castle, once heavy with shadow and tension, seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. The tapestries on the walls, the threads in the chambers, even the snow outside, glimmered faintly in acknowledgement of her victory. She had faced the weaver, unravelled his power, and emerged with her child intact. Yet somewhere in the deepest reaches of her mind, she knew the truth. The world was woven with threads she could not see, and every bargain, every whispered promise left its mark. The weaver's absence was not a guarantee of safety, only a pause, a momentary relief before the next challenge arrived. She stood at the window, watching the sun sink behind the hills, and let the child coo in her arms. The wind carried the faint scent of frost and pine, pure and sharp. She understood, finally, that vigilance and love were intertwined, and that courage was often measured not by the battles we choose to fight, but by the ones we endure silently, in shadow, for the sake of those we protect. As the moon rose over the castle towers, the queen and her child remained together in the quiet chamber. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the memory of bargains made, of threads woven and severed, of a man who had once claimed the name of every life he touched. But within the room there was warmth, there was safety, and there was love, fragile, delicate, and unbreakable. And though the weaver had vanished, his name no longer held power over them. The lesson remained. Every action has consequence. Every bargain leaves a trace, and courage is the thread that binds the heart to hope. The kingdom, blanketed in snow, held its breath, knowing that though darkness could always return, it would never touch the bond between mother and child.